Amazing. Well, thank you for being the deck master today. I'll just say next slide and you can move on. But for the time being, hi everyone. I am Minna Taylor. And welcome to Risk Taking 101. I love this topic. I think it's such an essential topic, especially as we become more and more automated, as we are sort of challenged to take greater risks in the service of innovation, and even in sort of making ourselves perceived as valuable contributors, essential contributors in the future of work. Risk taking, the ability to take risk, is going to be fundamental to your success in that process. So super, super excited to walk you through the background, how to sort of conceive of risk, and then ultimately how to practice risk in ways that feel not only accessible, but meaningful and transformational. What I will ask is I am going to have a lot of prompts to contribute in the chat. So whether you're watching this after on the recording or whether you're here live in session today, definitely take some time to reflect on the questions and contribute your responses into the chat if you're in the session today. It will be beneficial. There's always power in even the most obvious question, reflecting and kind of coming back to basics in that regard. Let's do the next slide. Before we kick into today's session, I always like to establish rules of the game. And there are only 2 rules that I'll ask you this time, not a lot of rules, but when I say rules, I think when we play, the only way we can play effectively, the only way we can play meaningfully, and the only way that we can really challenge ourselves to play as fully as possible is to have rules. There is freedom within structure. So in today's session, what I'll ask is that you really maintain attention. Distraction is easy, attention is hard. When we are in places of distraction, especially when we are approaching moments of risk, that is when we can move into the space of catastrophizing or speculation. We assume things when we lose attention and aren't receiving the data that's coming at us in real time. So do your best to give attention. I also respect the fact that you are giving your attention. I know that our time and our energy are our most valuable resources. So I will do my best to respect that during this space. And I want you to do your best to challenge yourself to exist fully in that space. With that being said, presence is not a permanent state of being. You might be all in to what is happening in the session today, and all of a sudden you're like, but what am I going to have for dinner later? And that's totally fine. That's absolutely okay. Our thoughts come in, thoughts go out. When you notice that happening, simply click in, say, I'm back, and re-engage your attention. So attention is one rule that I'll propose for us. The next rule is no judgment. You may think, risk. Okay, yeah, I think I know. Assuming, expecting, anticipating. You may have an opinion about what's happening. Risk manifests in funny ways, and it can also oftentimes be in the form of judgment. In sort of this narrative that we construct around what we're hearing, how it applies to us, where we fall on the spectrum of knowledge around any particular subject, where we assume the instructor falls on knowledge around any particular subject. So as we move through here, just notice any judgments that are coming up. No one is here to judge you. Hopefully you are not here to judge, but rather observe and learn. But if you do notice that judgment voice is ringing in and really wanting to have space and really wanting to make its presence known, honor it, say hello, ask it to wait, and then you can revisit it later, maybe over cocktails or mocktails. So as much as you can, reserve judgment for after the session. Leave yourself fully open to receiving these concepts. Really listen actively and see what resonates and what you can maybe get inspired to try out and explore on your own. All right, next slide, please. When we think about risk, there's a scale of risk. There's a spectrum of risk taking, from those who are all about risk to those who are distinctly risk averse. And so I find it helpful to, let's just get some data. Let's see where we are. Let's create a baseline for who is here. And again, if you're watching at home, definitely feel free to sort of note this for yourself. But let's pop into the chat here. When you think about risk, when someone is like, hey, I have this super risky thing for you to do, are you like, yes, I am all in, heck yeah, yay, risk? That's on one side of the spectrum. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have, heck no, not even possible. Ask that person over there, boo, risk. Or are you somewhere in the middle that's like, maybe, like if there are snacks. So are you a yay person? Are you a boo person? Or are you a snacks person? So type into the chat if you're a yay person, a boo person, or a snacks person. Yeah, exactly. I'm all in when it comes to risky business, you know? I don't know if you're talking about the movie, but I enjoy a good movie night as long as there's snacks. Give me that popcorn. Maybe person, snacks person. Yeah, averse. Okay, 8%. We changed the scale there, but I love that. We're moving into Likert territory. Can get on board. Boo or slight, maybe with snacks. Okay, great. All right, so we have mostly in sort of the middle category, leaning into the risk aversion category, and amazing, you're in the right place. So hopefully by the end of today's session, you're like, you know what? I think I might be a yay person. I might be a yes risk person. So just check in with yourself after the session and see if maybe that opinion has transformed of not only how you feel about it, but what you actually perceive that you're capable of. Because sometimes when it comes to risk, it's a lot about mindset, but we'll get into that in a moment. So another point of data. What does risk feel like? So if we're like, or if we're like, maybe, or if we're like, yeah, what does it feel like? Give me like a word, either a feeling, unsure, yeah, I love that. Scary, for sure, uncomfortable, excitement, risky business, love it. A rush, yes, we got that adrenaline pumping, cautious, yes, skeptical, maybe. Yeah, that doom feeling. Oh, the doom feeling, that is so real, right? When the dread just washes over us and we're like, I can't possibly do it. And that feeling resonates in the body. Sometimes it's so strong that it actually distracts us from being able to cognitively focus, from getting our thoughts in order, or from even connecting, which when we're having high stakes conversations, when we're having consequential conversations, that feeling overrides our ability to connect. So being aware of the experience of risk, as well as your openness and availability to risk, are two essential data points. When we think about the experience of risk, this idea of doom or cautious or uncomfortable or scary, the way we talk about risk when it comes to behavior, it manifests in particular ways. So that rush that we're talking about, that adrenaline that we're talking about, is the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, freeze response. And when we perceive that moment, when it approaches us in consciousness, our body is like, okay, before I do anything, let me make sure I'm safe. And so how that manifests, and this may feel familiar to you, feel free to contribute in the chat if you're like, oh yeah, definitely felt that before, is we tend to hold our breath. How many times have you finished a presentation and you're like, I feel lightheaded. I feel like I'm going to pass out because I've been holding my breath. Actually, I don't remember what happened because I was holding my breath the entire time. When we hold our breath, our body also gets tense because our body's like, brace yourself, and our breath gets held. That also compromises our cognition. So when we go blank, when we can't remember what we just said, a lot of that is the outcome of adrenaline in the body, the heart racing, all of those things. Yeah, I don't remember what happened. That is because you're not breathing. That is because risk has taken over. The idea and experience and embodiment of risk is fully in you. And your brain is like, I am diverting all essential resources to not dying, to feeling like I can just make it through this moment and get out safely on the other end. The key thing to take away here is that our bodies bear the burden of risk, especially because we identify it as risk. So risk can present itself in unknown moments. Risk can also be anticipated, which exacerbates the physical expression of risk. Risk lives in our bodies. Let's hop to the next slide. So again, I want you to contribute into the chat here. I want to define risk for you, but first I want to explore what risk is not. What is not risk? What does not feel risky to you? Or what is maybe the opposite of risk? What do you think when you think of the opposite of risk? Routine, yes. Consistency, familiarity, predictability. You feel at ease, it's comfortable. Yeah, maybe you feel like you can actually create instead of just move into crisis control. A walk in the park, comfort zone. Yeah, not risky, something I've done before, but with bad consequences. Yeah, I can breathe easy. I love that. What is not risk is safety and status quo and familiarity. Well, what we can then think of in contrast to that, when we talk about what risk is, again, as it relates to behavior, risk is the experience of vulnerability, moving outside of one's comfort zone, getting uncomfortable. The experience of vulnerability, taking definitive action around an unknown outcome. So I'm going to do this. I don't know how it's going to end, and I don't know how I'm going to feel, and I don't know how anyone else is going to feel, and it may totally mess up. And actually, you know what? I'm good. Right? So risk is taking definitive action around unknown outcome, and it is the experience of vulnerability. We experience risk most strongly when it touches the deepest parts of us. When it feels personal. So when it feels like there is something on the line, when there is something of consequence that is could be compromised, that we could be held in judgment or accountable for. When it feels personal, the risk feels even greater because the vulnerability of failure is that much greater. With all that being the case, with potential judgment on the line, with potential failure on the line, with vulnerability and really feeling like our egos are going to be examined and on display, why do it? Why do we take risks? Why do risks matter? What is the importance of risk? Pop in the chat. What do you think? Why do we even take risks? Because we could all just stay to grow. Yeah, 100%. The reward is big. Yeah, desperation. Someone made me. Yeah, to try something new, to learn. Innovation, new information, growth, understanding, the challenge, the stretch, the pursuit. So there's this side of risk that actually feels good. So risk itself, in its perception, is uncomfortable and scary. But then when we think about the outcome of risk, the benefit of risk, It's pretty remarkable to have taken the risk to pursue intentionally unknown outcome through the experience of vulnerability and actually like learn, expand, and grow. What else are we here for? Now, that all sounds well and good, but it still sucks. And do we want to go through it? And can we leave it to somebody else? That person over there can learn something new and I will benefit from their learning, and then we can all get on with our day. I want everyone to feel like they have the capacity to grow, to innovate, to change, to transform, to surprise yourself. The opportunity to surprise yourself on what you're capable of achieving and experiencing and contributing, that is a worthwhile way to invest your time. But it doesn't make it any more comfortable. So because risk lives in the body, because it is a physical experience, here's the cool thing. We can actually practice risk. We can do it on purpose. And we can create resilience around the experience of this vulnerability that we have when we are taking risks, and expand our capacity thereby to imagine, to be creative, to be innovative, and to be valuable contributors, again, especially as we move into the future of work. Risk is an essential skill set, most importantly, because it leads to creative contribution. How we are going to go about practicing risk is through the practice of play. Next slide, please. So what is a word that comes to mind when you hear play? Pop that into the chat. When you hear the word play, if I'm like, all right, guys, we're going to play. What does that mean? Fun, games, fun, double, fun, enjoyment, team. Yeah. Collaboration, energy. Yeah. Pleasure. Play is a nice word. Risk, your contributions around risk made it feel like kind of a dirty word. I love play. So even though it's fun, and even though it does all these things, creates enjoyment, creates a sense of collective effervescence, creates some shared experience, allows us to adapt and stay curious. Oftentimes when we think about play, we think about it as sort of a frivolous pursuit of ridiculous outcome. Play can oftentimes be equated with comedy or something that's funny. But I take play very seriously. And when it comes to practicing risk, again, an essential skill set, especially as we move into the future of work, play is going to be our greatest companion in this process. So here's how I define play. Play is the intangible space of unpredictability and aliveness. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, that sounds pretty similar to how you defined risk, the intentional pursuit of unknown outcome. So the intangible space of unpredictability and aliveness and the pursuit of unknown outcome, they're the same. Yet we perceive them and experience them in distinctly different ways. But it's the same action. When we go to kick a ball, we don't know where that ball will go. I mean, maybe if you do, if you're a skilled soccer player. I myself am not. I'm like, there it went. So we don't know what will happen. We don't know if it will be intercepted. We don't know if we'll make a goal, but we kick it anyway and we commit to the kick. That's play, right? But if someone says, kick it or else, all of a sudden there's risk. And we can actually have agency in terms of defining how we step into that space and what point of view we're practicing. So play, beyond being the intangible space of unpredictability and aliveness, how it shows up in more practical ways is at its very basis, it is listening and responding. I receive, I give. I'm yes-anding. I'm adding on. I'm creatively contributing. This happens in brainstorming, listening, responding. This happens in research and development, listening, responding. This happens when we're doing research, listen, respond. It's strategic decision-making, creative problem solving. Yeah, I will. Play is collaboration. Play is hypothesis in action. So again, play, the definition of play, the intangible space of unpredictability and aliveness. Risk, the intentional pursuit of unknown outcome. The same thing. So now that lets us know that we can actually flip the script on risk and start to practice those moments that we have been conditioned and all created mental habit around defining as risk. We can now say, I'm going to approach it as play. I'm going to approach it as hypothesis in action. I'm going to listen intently and yes, and in my response. It lowers the consequence, the perceived consequence of risk. That unknown outcome now becomes a delightful aspect of the experience itself. It allows us to be active participants, whereas risk, we withhold, play, we move forward. We already know how to play in the face of risk. This is the cool thing. Like, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know how to do. In fact, you've been doing it since you were born. Play is the first thing we learn how to do. It is the first action we entail. Before we have the consciousness of consequence, before we have the perception of things going badly and now start to understand that risk is a thing, we play. Who are you? What's that over there? I wonder what happens when I do this. We start in a state of play. We learn how to do it very early on, and it is the thing that makes us distinctly human. Unfortunately, over time, because we start to understand consequence, we lose this sense of wonder and discovery and connection. We start to control our action to fit into an idea of what is expected of us. We condition ourselves in our behavior, in our perspective, in our pursuit to seek perfection versus drive through the action of play. The perception and consequence of failure leads to a risk aversion. It's the process of restriction and tension. When I ask you, how do you think about play? You said ease. Risk is tension and restriction. We are most at ease when we are at play. We are at ease in the uncertainty and the potential consequence of failure. We are free of tension. Our brains are working creatively. We're thinking strategically. So as we evolve into this next iteration of life, of work, of industry, this new era of innovation, we have to think about play as an essential tool, and it will capitalize on our full creative potential, and it will create the ease that's necessary to bring our imagination to life, to generate the new ideas that we ultimately populate into our automation tools. Play will allow us to do that. So when we say risk is an essential skill set, we can think about it as play as the essential skill set. It is the only thing that will separate us from the robots. I promise you. Robots are like, I do what I'm told in a way that makes you think I'm not. And when I say robots, read AI. Okay, speaking of AI, let's go to our next slide. So I asked ChatGPT to, I gave it the prompt, how does AI experience risk? And so it gave me this long answer, but I want to zoom in to the bottom here, where it says AI does not have the capacity to feel fear, uncertainty, or any emotion associated with risk. AI is artificial intelligence. So what it lacks is what we innately possess, which is emotional intelligence. Why are we not looking at as this being the thing to optimize? Our emotional intelligence, our ability to embrace bravely and boldly those moments of vulnerability, to pursue in intentional ways unknown outcome. We cannot optimize our performance to keep pace with technology. We just cannot do it. We cannot become more proficient, and we cannot become more efficient. We will burn out. It is not sustainable. It invites tension. We cannot exist that way. So we have to optimize for what is essentially human. We have to really strengthen that muscle and reinvest in that innate skill set, which is our ability to create, imagine, and connect. This is a space of risk, and therefore it is also the space of play. Let's hop to the next slide. Joseph Campbell said it best when he talks about what we are seeking to do in this one life that we have available to us, that we are conscious to. And this is exactly what he talks about here. This is exactly the space of vulnerability. This is exactly the space of play. Our task, therefore, is to communicate directly from one inward world to another in such a way that an actual shock of experience will have been rendered. Not a mere statement for the information or persuasion of a brain, but an effective communication across the void of space and time from one center of consciousness to another. A mere statement for the information or persuasion of a brain, that's safe. That's comfortable. That's comfort zone. I am delivering you this information unemotionally, and I am detached from how you receive it so that I can maintain a level of emotional control. The willingness to cross the void of space and time from one center of consciousness to another in such a way that a shock of experience would have been rendered, that is vulnerable. That is saying, I am here, I am present with you. That is not being unconscious. That does not mean inconsiderate. That does not mean having a lack of understanding and compassionate awareness that you are in this world and of this world. It means the willingness to say yes, to play and to play fully. This is the space of aliveness. This is the landscape of vulnerability. This is the space of humanity. This is the space that has the power to transform systems and invite creative innovation. Every critical decision starts with a connected conversation. If you're trying to persuade someone around a big idea, if you're trying to enroll somebody to support you in your big idea, if you're setting boundaries, if you're asking for what you need, play is the action that will get you there. It will put you in a position to embrace the vulnerability and negotiate that moment with the most empowered potential possible. AI was built for perfection. Humans were not. We have to embrace our inevitable imperfection and leverage it as an asset. That requires a bit of a mindset shift. So how did I get here? How did this all come into play? Where did these ideas come from? And really, have they worked before? Or am I just selling you magic beans? So let's skip to the next slide. I have witnessed the power of play reignite the most accomplished professionals, bring about an entirely new level of potential and allow them to connect more deeply to their teams, their colleagues, and even in other aspects of their life. We spend a majority of our time at work. If we can practice something like play, it will inform and enhance every point of connection we have throughout every aspect of our life. So I want to share the story of this woman who was the chief operating officer for this ed tech startup in New York. And she called me because she needed some support around public speaking. And I was like, okay, sure. Yeah, let's do that. It felt like a big deal for me. She was one of my first big executive clients. And I was like, oh man, I'm so excited. And so I go into her office and we kind of do an initial diagnostic initially. So I have her present and I'm going to take notes. And as she's presenting, she's about halfway through. And I think to myself, oh my God, this woman is really good. Like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to help her. She's so polished. She's hitting all the right notes. She seems so relatable. She's great at storytelling. Like, how am I going to help her? So in order to buy myself some time, I was like, yeah. Great. You know what? Why don't we just do it again? Just do it again. Sometimes in acting class, what they would have us do, I have a master's in acting. And so in acting class, what they would have us do is do a scene back to back immediately to discover new choices, new things that emerge, just doing it back to back. So it's like, okay, I'll use this tactic on her. So I had her do the talk again immediately. And it was exactly the same, down to like her little like moments, you know, her little aside or her little extemporaneous moments of expression. It was exactly the same. And I realized she had done a tremendous job of creating this perfectly polished version of authenticity, but it wasn't alive. It wasn't a living, breathing thing. And that made me realize that good is perfunctory, but flawed is world-class. The willingness to take a risk, to fail, to be flawed, to play imperfectly, that is the level of world-class performers. So we explored her voice in dynamic ways. We opened up her body. We got her imagination going. I use these children's playing cards to get her to tell improvisational stories. And it brought her back to life. I had another client. He was executive at a luxury hotel brand, and they were doing a up brand post-COVID, and he had to give a big talk to the entire organization. And he was like, I don't know what to say, and I'm really nervous about saying it. So we built the talk, and then when it came time to help him actually present, he was so tight. He was attached to perfection. He wanted to prevent the opportunity for flaw and failure if it was the last thing he did. And I was like, I am not having it, sir. No, because you know why? You'll get up there and you'll deliver it like that and no one will care because you will not have crossed the void of space and time. You will not have created a shock of experience on your audience. So we brought a mini trampoline and had him start bouncing when he was practicing. And it brought his breath into his body, it got his brain moving, and it brought his voice to life. Play is a space of unpredictability and aliveness. So we intentionally invited aliveness and intentionally invited unpredictability. Play reduces the perception of risk, and the consequence of it is reduced. But I see examples of this all the time. These are two big examples. I see it all the time. So maybe you have a pitch to give or a presentation to give, and you memorize every single moment. And you lose the aliveness, but you gain the perfection. If that's what you're in service of, you're doing it right, but your audience won't pay attention. They will leave with nothing, and it would have been a waste of time. I really believe that. High stakes conversations. We try to sort of prepare. We want to have the right answers. We anticipate what it is we're going to say, and that pulls us out of presence. It feels safer because now we're thinking ahead. We're thinking about what we're going to say, so we have the right answer, but we're not actually listening. So that space of connectivity is lost. I see this in comparison culture, the desire to be the perfect parent, the perfect leader, to fit in perfectly. We deny our authenticity, our gender identity, our sexual identity, our political identity. The notion of taking risks is so challenging. And if we approach it as play, it makes it a little bit more accessible. We are operating in a conditioned safe zone. It's the behavior of perfection, but we will never succeed in this pursuit because perfection does not exist in the realm of human behavior. We are distinctly imperfect and flawed. And if we try to perform with such polish and perfection in mind, we lose the humanity. We lose the aliveness. We lose our ability to influence and connect and persuade and create impact. We lose our ability to create and think imaginatively. So with the CEO, with the COO and with this executive, I realized that play is absolutely serious. The willingness to look silly is at the heart of effective leadership and generative risk-taking. Next slide, please. So if you remember nothing else from today's talk, remember this: silly is your superpower. I just got off a call today with this woman who's giving this major presentation in Singapore at this global conference. And I asked her at one point to just shake it out, just shake it out. And she was so resistant because she felt ridiculous. And it was just us. The willingness to look silly, the willingness to feel foolish and fail, that is a superpower. It will ascend you into leadership, whether that's being a leader in your home, a leader in your community, or a leader in your organization. The willingness to look silly. Think about Richard Branson. I cannot think of a more playful, powerful, accomplished leader because he has the willingness to exist fully and unapologetically in that space. And we see it all the time. And it bringing that sense of humanity, that sense of flaw and failure and silliness is so relatable. It allows us to connect. Movie stars tripping when they walk up to accept their award on stage, our presentations, they stop working. Someone is late to a meeting, or maybe we're running late to a meeting. I hate that feeling, running late to a meeting. You said the complete wrong thing in the complete wrong moment to a person of consequence, maybe a boss or something. The ability to embrace the silly and engage through the principles of play will allow you to weather these moments with authenticity and presence, but definitely not perfection. And that's a superpower. Next slide. So let's imagine that we're operating in this space. What would happen if, when presented with the unexpected, we were able to embrace it with curiosity instead of constraint? Possibility instead of perfection? What would happen if, when we wanted to speak up, or share an idea, or ask a question, or advocate for someone, or advocate for ourselves, no matter how silly you felt, you just did it? You just said yes to yourself. What would happen if you were able to care deeply about what you were doing and simultaneously surrender attachment to the outcome? I am pursuing intentionally, but not controlling so much in my safety that I'm willing to say it will end how it ends as long as I am pursuing it with intention and presence and purpose. That's the risk. What if others around you saw this, saw you leading by example, and it gave them the same freedom to take risks and play and experiment and come back to life? What untapped potential would emerge if we weren't so afraid all the time? Unfortunately, this vision is harder to manifest than it is to imagine. So let's figure out why that is. Next slide, please. We like to say no. We love to say no. People are like, here's a big risky thing, and we're like, no. They're like, here, take a chance, and we're like, no. Right? We love to say no. The moment we are called to rise to the occasion, especially in a moment that feels consequential, when we approach that moment of unknown or unpredictability, of uncertainty, that moment of vulnerability, we like to say no. And I call that moment the threshold of choice. That moment where we can either retreat, stay safe, or advance, take risk, say yes, move into play space. But we don't like to do that. We like to be like, nah, I'm good. I'll watch them do it. They're doing it great. They can keep doing it. But I like to say no. I'm going to say no. So say it with me. No maintains the status quo. You just get all printed on a t-shirt. No maintains the status quo. We are here to advance. We are here to inspire. We are here to imagine. If we're not doing something that moves something forward, what are we doing it for? No maintains the status quo. The willingness to say yes is actually the disruptive action that will drive things forward. There's risk in the yes. Saying yes requires courage. We have a predisposition to stay in our safety and comfort zone. But here's the thing. I heard this great interview with Eckhart Tolle talking about evolution. And he was like, a bird would still be a fish if it stayed put when called to rise to the evolutionary occasion to get out of the water. If the water's hot and the fish doesn't leap, it dies. So in service of evolution, in service of continuing to expand, move through that area of discomfort. Because when you're saying no, challenge yourself to say yes. Next slide. What we also like to do is we define our future. We like to predict. Again, we like to know how things will end. We are attached to this perfection, attached to getting it right. The expectation, this expectation, it actually increases the consequence of failing. But we like to do it. We like to not only assess the potential outcome, but then we also build, work toward, and operate as we can absolutely control the outcome. We make assumptions about the outcome that often impede our ability to just begin because we're spending so much time speculating, or we've defined such a monumental outcome that we think there's no way we can possibly achieve it. So not only does it diminish our capacity to live presently in the space of play, it actually diminishes our ability to start the process at all. We like to know how things will end before we try. We crave predictability and certainty. Next slide. We are also a lonely island of suffering. The resistance to risk is all self-imposed. You create that for yourself. You do that all for yourself. The body responds, right? So the body responds in predictable ways to risk. Risk lives in the body, but the brain, the mind, is what creates the narrative around the experience of risk. We hold ourselves there. Even by calling it risk instead of play, we do that to ourselves. We tell ourselves that we feel nervous. We tell ourselves that we can't. Resistance to risk, it lives in us and we do it to ourselves. And you know, I get it. It's like this, like, it's real easy to fall into these spaces where it's, no, I don't want to, because I think that everyone will look at me, or everyone will think I'm silly, or if I fail, it's gonna be all my fault. You know, we sort of create these narratives, and it's all happening inside of ourselves. And we're this little lonely island of suffering who's just not wanting to take risks, who wants to maintain the status quo because it's easier to stay put than to be vulnerable and say yes. But ultimately, that vulnerability of risk is the expression of the ego's resistance to harm. It's our quiet little battle, and we do it all to ourselves. That's the crazy part. If you feel it and you feel like, I wish I could be more risk resilient, you can, because you can choose. You can make that determination for yourself, especially if we practice in the body and we train our mind. Yeah, exactly. We're our own worst enemy. It's so challenging. All right, let's move on to the next slide, and then we'll get to some solutions, I promise. So we really crave acceptance, and I think this is a really essential one to mention. So when we talk about failing, when we talk about the consequence of failure or judgment or being rejected or flaws, not only is there ego consequence, right? So we feel bad for ourselves, but there's actually the potential to lower the likelihood of of finding belonging. So if we think about Maslow's hierarchy, pretty basic, right? Belonging is one of our essential needs. The being witnessed in our risk taking and failing, all of a sudden we are now othered. We might perceive ourselves as other. We might anticipate that we will be othered. But being witnessed in the risk taking is vulnerable. Taking risks might carry the consequence of being alienated. I also don't want to sort of sugarcoat that. Taking risks is bold, it's daring. The people that break the rules, the people that are willing to, work fast and break things, right? Some people might be like, that was not good. You are no longer welcome here, right? So there is consequence of that. Is it worth not pursuing the imagination because someone might have an opinion about it? I don't think so. We monitor and adapt our behavior toward belonging, so we stay safe. We resist the silly. We don't see silly as our superpower. We see it as the thing that will allow people to make fun of us. And we just want to be part of the crowd. We don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. Maybe you do, in which case, hurrah, but most of us do not. It's also in this sort of craving acceptance, in resisting the risk, in not embracing it as play, the cumulative impact is groupthink. We limit the capacity to disrupt, deny, maybe create conflict with. Groupthink is probably one of the more dangerous things that we have to actively attend to as we move into hyperautomation. And ultimately, when we seek acceptance and safety, we atrophy the desire to say the thing, to be the troublemaker, to ask the dumb question. And again, we are born into that place. We are born in a position to be like, this is what I think. I'm going to say it. I don't understand that it's not the right thing. So we atrophy that part of ourselves. Next slide, please. So if we think about risk in the body, and we can approach it as play, but then we ask ourselves, well, if I want to do this, why am I not doing it? Well, gradually these habits, which we take to be natural, they enslave us. We become restricted in what we can say and how we can say this. This is Patsy Rodenberg. She's one of the foremost leading experts on communication. So what we take natural is actually our conditioned behavior that keeps us safe. So our incapacity to embrace risk, to play freely, and to leverage silly as our superpower is a conditioned behavior that has moved into unconscious habit in service of allowing us to belong, stay safe, and not feel judged. So what can we do about this ultimately? Because we want to know how we can take action to start exploring what it means to take risk in effective and meaningful ways. So let's go through some 4 quick steps. First slide, or next slide, please. So first one we have here, if we think about risk, the habit, sort of the way that we take it to feel natural is unconscious. We now need to move it into conscious territory. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start noticing. We're just going to observe. And we're going to objectively observe. So we are literally going to collect data on our lived experience. We're going to be like, oh, when I went and had a conversation with X, I felt Y. Interesting. Not, oh my God, I can't believe I felt that way. What an idiot. No. We are objective about this. We are just collecting the data. Did you hold your breath? Did you feel cognitively compromised? Do you feel like you contributed in the way that you want to? Did you feel, right? We're collecting data. Do not have an opinion about the data. We're just collecting the data. What's your breath doing? How's your focus? How's your mental clarity? You cannot change what you cannot see. Next slide, please. Once we've collected all of this data, then we're going to start exploring it. But just like when you're like, is that water hot yet? You're not like, you don't put your whole hand under. You just dip your finger in, right? Is it hot? So the explore piece is we're just going to dip a finger in. We're not putting our whole hand under. So first we want to try things out, but making sure that it feels authentic to us. So let's see. So it should feel like low stakes, but a stretch, and it shouldn't feel deeply consequential. This is not the time to like really go all out. But if you want to dive in, also like go for it. That would be the fullest expression of risk, and I applaud you. You know, but make sure it feels low stakes but a stretch. Again, when we think about our comfort zone, all we have to do is go boop, and we're on the other side. We've literally just stressed ourselves. We don't have to take a running leap, right? We're just going to step on the other side, get a sense, come back to equilibrium, and continually, incrementally explore. We're just going to see. We're going to see what happens when now I'm conscious of, am I breathing? Am I conscious of, is my body feeling free, at ease? Am I conscious of the fact that I'm still listening, observe? And then I can explore certain things that stretch my comfort zone while still maintaining that objective awareness. See how we're doing? We're building here. Explore is hypothesis in action. Next slide. Now, once we've explored this, now we're really going to apply it. Now we're going to take this, we're going to get off the practice track. We're going to go into the real world, and we're going to say, all right, what happens when I really lean in to the notion of play when I am approaching moments of risk? So we're going to leverage silly as our superpower. The same strategies of risk are going to apply here. So, or some strategies for taking risks in real time. So I mentioned yes and already. So when you're in a meeting, when you're in a collaborative conversation, simply using the words yes and to initiate your contribution will get your voice kick-started, which will allow you to cross that threshold of fear. Yeah. It will also set you up to contribute creatively and collaboratively. And also lowers the stakes on saying the right thing because you're simply adding on to what was already said. Active listening. You are no longer a lonely island of suffering in your head, thinking about all the way that people are thinking about you. No, you're here. You're in that void of space and time. You can also think about rules of the game. So once you start to build awareness around how you show up in different spaces, you can now think about setting rules, which means things like setting boundaries, conscious consent, advocacy for people. You can start sort of testing these boundaries because you've now empowered yourself to say yes in those moments when you were primed to say no. Application allows you to play freely and play well with others. And now the last step here, next slide. Just like any good experiment, we're going to iterate. So once we've observed, once we've tested it out, once we've applied it fully, now we can step back and start the cycle over again by saying, okay, how do I want to adjust behavior? How can I think about being more conscious of my breathing? How can I think about being more expressive in my voice? How can I think about listening more actively to others? How can I think about challenging myself to contribute even in moments when I think I have nothing important or meaningful to say? Iterate, continue to build incrementally. And this will be a lifelong process, but the entire process is in and of itself a game that you are playing with yourself as you walk through this life to feel more engaged in this life, to feel more like an active participant in your life, like an active creator in spaces that feel consequential, and you do it with a sense of empowerment and deep agency. Observe, explore, apply, iterate. So when you approach that moment, the threshold of choice, and you have the option to retreat or advance, I want to ask yourself one question. Next slide. Not what's the worst that can happen, but what's the best that can happen? Just like we're changing the narrative, those unconscious habits that we have conditioned ourselves to understand in terms of how we're processing our lived experience, let us not default to catastrophe. Let us ascend to possibility. That is a space of play. And when it comes to taking risks and starting risks, Simply ask yourself, what is the best that can happen? Let's play that game.